The first clue came on a Tuesday night, though at the time, Mara didn't know it was a clue at all. She was sitting at her kitchen counter with her laptop open, listening to the hum of her refrigerator and the faint crickets outside her window. Her power bill had arrived via email, and she'd opened it expecting the usual number, something around $120. Reasonable, predictable. Instead, the number glared back at her, $362.48. Her first instinct was disbelief. She refreshed the page, checked the address, even made sure she hadn't accidentally opened an old bill. But no, it was current, dated for this month, with her account number clearly printed at the top. She frowned, reaching for her phone to open the power company's app. The usage graph showed a sharp spike starting 2 months ago, climbing steadily as though someone had plugged a space heater into every outlet and left them running day and night. That didn't make sense. Mara was careful with power. She worked from home as a graphic designer, sure, but her setup was modest. A laptop, a small monitor, a desk lamp. She had replaced every bulb in the house with energy-efficient LED, unplugged unused appliances, and even turned off her water heater at night to save on costs. So where was this extra power going? She called the power company, expecting some sort of clerical error. "Good evening, Pacific Energy. This is Claire speaking. How can I help you?" "Hi," Mara said, trying to keep her voice calm. "My electricity bill just tripled. I think there's a mistake." Claire asked for her account number and pulled up the details. Mara could hear the faint clicking of a keyboard and the low hum of background chatter in the call center. "Okay, I see your account," Claire said. "Your usage has definitely increased since July. By quite a bit, actually. We ran a remote meter diagnostic last week. It's functioning normally." "So there's no mistake?" "I'm afraid not. It looks like consistent usage, not a one-time surge. You might have a faulty appliance or a short somewhere that's drawing power." Mara exhaled slowly. "Could it be that someone's using my power somehow, like, if a neighbor's line is crossed?" There was a short pause. "Technically, it's possible," Claire admitted, "but very rare. Usually it's something within the home. You could try flipping your main breaker overnight to see if the meter still moves. If it does, that might suggest an external draw." After hanging up, Mara sat in silence for a long moment. The refrigerator hummed again, steady and familiar. But now it sounded like something sinister, like a clock ticking down to an unseen problem. She turned off every light in the house and stepped outside into the cool night. The small cul-de-sac was quiet, except for the occasional bark of a distant dog. Across the street, the HOA office glowed with light. Its large windows revealed the silhouettes of desks, filing cabinets, and the faint flicker of a television mounted on the wall. It was nearly 11 p.m. The HOA building always seemed awake. That thought nagged at her as she stood on her front porch. The office was supposed to close at 6, yet there were always lights on, computers running, even the soda machine near the door humming through the night. The HOA fees were supposed to cover building maintenance and operations, but no one had ever explained why the small neighborhood office needed to operate like a 24-hour newsroom. She laughed softly to herself. Paranoid, maybe, but the idea wouldn't leave her alone. On impulse, she went to her garage and found a flashlight. Then she crouched by her electric meter on the side of the house. The numbers ticked forward at a steady pace. She flipped her breaker switch and waited. The house went silent, no hum, no light, but the meter kept spinning. Her heart thudded. That wasn't supposed to happen. She stood in the dark, the flashlight beam trembling slightly in her hand. Something or someone was still drawing power. For a moment, she thought about calling the power company back, but it was after midnight now. She turned toward the HOA building again. Its lights still shone, defiant and constant, like a taunt. The next morning, when the sun had barely risen, Mara walked the edge of her property line. The HOA's small storage shed stood just behind the office, only 30 yards from her side fence. It was where they kept maintenance tools and community equipment. The mower, the power washer, the Christmas decorations. She crouched near the spot where her main conduit entered the ground and followed it visually toward the back of her lot. Something caught her eye. The mulch bed near her fence looked newly turned, the soil darker and less compacted than the rest. She brushed it aside with her hand. Beneath it, half buried, was a thin gray cable branching off her conduit and running underground, straight toward the direction of the HOA shed. Her fingers went cold. She followed the faint trail, crouching as she moved, until the line disappeared beneath the fence. On the other side, just visible through a gap, she saw the cable rise up from the ground near the shed's electrical junction box. Mara stood there, heart pounding in her ears, staring at the buried wire. It wasn't an accident. Someone had intentionally tapped into her power line and run it to the HOA property. She straightened slowly, glancing around the quiet neighborhood. Lawns were perfectly trimmed. Cars sat neatly in driveways. Flags fluttered in the morning breeze. Everything looked normal, too normal. She remembered the last HOA meeting she'd attended. Ted, the president, had joked about how the community office was the backbone of the neighborhood. He'd bragged about the new computers they'd installed, the upgraded air conditioner, the mini fridge for staff refreshments. All of that required power. Power that apparently wasn't coming from the HOA own account. Her stomach turned. She could already imagine how this had happened. Maybe the HOA power line had an issue months ago, and instead of fixing it properly, someone decided to borrow from the nearest house hers. It was probably supposed to be temporary, until they realized no one noticed the extra cost, until now. As she stood there, the early sunlight glinting off the shed's aluminum roof, a plan began to form in her mind. She wouldn't confront them yet, not without evidence. She'd need to catch them in the act, something undeniable, something that would expose the entire scam. She turned back toward her house, her thoughts sharpening like a blade. For months they'd been stealing from her, quietly, shamelessly, right under her nose. But soon they'd have no idea what was coming. Mara spent the rest of that day pacing her living room, her mind running faster than her pulse. Every time she passed the window and saw the HOA office across the street, anger simmered under her ribs. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the audacity. They tapped into her power line like she was some kind of oblivious idiot, like her home was just another resource they could quietly exploit. She knew that if she confronted them now, they'd deny everything. Ted, the HOA president, had that practiced politician's smile, charming when he wanted something, ruthless when cornered. He'd twist her accusation into paranoia, call it a misunderstanding, and by the end of the meeting, somehow make her look like the problem. No, she needed proof. Irrefutable proof. That night, she started researching. She stayed up past midnight scrolling through electrician forums, reading about energy theft cases, how people caught neighbors tapping their lines. She learned about smart meters that tracked consumption at minute intervals and how motion-triggered cameras with night vision could catch movement even in total darkness. By the time the sun rose, her cart on an online store looked like something out of a spy movie. Surveillance cameras, a portable power analyzer, a second smart meter, and a waterproof case to hide it. All it cost her nearly $300, but that felt like poetic symmetry. She was investing what they'd stolen. 2 days later, the packages arrived. Mara spent the weekend working on her trap. She shut off her power, unscrewed the panel cover, and carefully installed the smart meter upstream before the point where the suspicious cable branched off. The device would log every watt that passed through, time-stamped down to the second. She mounted the motion camera under the eaves, angled perfectly toward the power box. A second camera, hidden inside a garden light, watched the HOA shed from across the fence. She tested everything twice. When she was done, she stood back, looking at her handiwork with grim satisfaction. Every time Ted or his maintenance guy touched that line again, she'd know. For 2 nights, nothing happened. The HOA lights burned steadily past midnight as usual, but no motion alerts came through. She started to wonder if maybe they'd stopped using her power after sensing her snooping. Then, on the 3rd night, her phone buzzed. Motion detected at 1:13 a.m. Mara's stomach clenched. She opened the feed. The image flickered for a second, then cleared. There he was, Ted, in a hoodie, kneeling beside her power conduit, a small flashlight gripped between his teeth. He set down a toolbox, opened it, and pulled out a voltage reader. He pressed it against the line, glanced around, then adjusted the buried cable, tightening something near the junction point. Her pulse thundered. She took screenshots, one after another. When he finished, he wiped his hands on his jeans, picked up the toolbox, and walked casually back across the street toward the HOA building. The entire interaction lasted less than 4 minutes, but it was enough, more than enough. Mara didn't sleep that night. She sat in her kitchen with a cup of cold coffee, replaying the footage over and over. The next morning, she connected her laptop to the smart meter and pulled the logs. As expected, there was a surge in consumption that perfectly matched the time Ted had been there. Then, when she disconnected the illegal cable later that day to test her theory, her total usage dropped by nearly 70%. She smiled to herself, game over. The next step was timing. The HOA monthly meeting was scheduled for Wednesday night. She planned to walk in, calm and collected, and drop the evidence like a bomb. But before that, she wanted to make sure every piece of data was undeniable. She printed high-resolution photos from the video feed, highlighted the timestamps, and organized her documents into a tidy binder labeled Power Usage Discrepancy Evidence. By the time the meeting rolled around, Mara was ready. The HOA conference room smelled faintly of burnt coffee and old carpet. About a dozen residents sat in folding chairs, murmuring about landscaping updates and parking complaints. Ted stood at the front beside the whiteboard, his usual charm on display as he discussed upcoming community projects. He caught sight of Mara entering late and gave her a thin smile. "Ah, Ms. Linton," he said smoothly, "glad you could join us. We were just about to discuss next quarter's maintenance fees." Mara walked to the front, every eye following her. She set her binder on the table with a soft thump. "Actually," she said, her voice steady, "before we discuss fees, I think we need to talk about electricity." Ted blinked. "I'm sorry. The electricity that's been stolen from my house for the past 4 months." A ripple of whispers moved through the room. Ted chuckled awkwardly. "Stolen, Mara? I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding." "Is this a misunderstanding?" She interrupted, opening the binder and sliding a photo across the table. It showed Ted crouched by her power conduit, flashlight in his mouth, hand on the cable. The room went dead silent. Ted's face lost color. That's taken out of context." "Really?" Mara said, her tone cutting. "Because the smart meter data shows the power usage spiking exactly when you were at my property, then dropping when I disconnected your illegal cable to the HOA shed. Want to explain that context?" Another murmur rippled through the residence. One woman in the back gasped softly. Ted opened his mouth, then closed it again. Sweat glistened on his forehead. "I also sent copies of these logs and photos to the power company this morning," Mara continued, voice rising. "They confirmed unauthorized use of service. Inspectors are coming tomorrow. You might want to make sure your office wiring is in order before they arrive." A man from the HOA board leaned forward. "Is this true, Ted?" Ted stammered. "It was just temporary. Our breaker went out and—" "So you stole from a homeowner?" someone snapped. Voices erupted, angry and incredulous. People stood up, pointing fingers, demanding answers. Ted tried to speak, but the noise drowned him out. The illusion of control he'd always carried crumbled in an instant. Mara stood back, arms folded, watching the chaos unfold. There was something deeply satisfying about the sight. For months, she'd been gaslit by her own bills, made to feel careless or stupid. Now, everyone saw the truth laid bare in the harsh fluorescent light. Eventually, she slipped out while the shouting continued. The cool night air hit her face like a reset button. Across the street, the HOA office still glowed, unaware that by morning, inspectors would be pulling apart its wiring and finding the evidence she'd uncovered. 2 days later, she received a call from the power company. The representative confirmed what she already knew. The HOA had been illegally connected to her meter for months, rerouting thousands of kilowatt hours. The city was pressing charges for energy theft and property tampering. When the next month's power bill arrived, Mara almost laughed. $78.64, the lowest she'd ever seen. That night, she turned on every light in the house, the hallway lamps, the porch light, even the Christmas string she hadn't bothered to take down. The rooms glowed warmly, bright and defiant. Across the street, the HOA office sat dark for the first time since she'd moved in.